welcome back to Vinyl Friday, where I go through my records like a big nerd and talk about why I love them. This week is Classic Album Week on the channel, and that means that you, the listeners and viewers, because this is a multimedia affair, help me to choose a classic album for the channel by way of a poll posted on my posts channel. This month's poll was not even close. The winner of the poll took 50% of the vote. The album in question is Paul Simon's Paul Simon. Now, when we last left Paul Simon earlier this year, he was busy processing an impending breakup from his longtime bestie, Art Garfunkel. For the full story, you can check out the episode we did on Bridge Over Troubled Water, which was another of the Classic Album Week winners. But here's the Cliff Notes version. After the recording of the Graduate soundtrack and Bookends, both Paul Simon and longtime bestie Art Garfunkel were cast in a film adaptation of Joseph Heller's Catch-22. However, Paul Simon's role was cut, Garfunkel's was not, so Art Garfunkel went away to film. Filming ran over by months, during which time Paul Simon was just kicking around in New York City. Editor Nancy here. I am furious that she didn't take this opportunity to say, "Knocking around in New York City," waiting for Art Garfunkel to come back so that they could finish their damn album. By the time the filming had wrapped, the album had wrapped, and the tour for that album was over, these two were not on good terms, and they parted ways relatively acrimoniously. Following the breakup, Art Garfunkel continued his film career, and Paul Simon taught songwriting classes at New York University. Presumably, he was also ruminating on what would come next. A quick aside, before we go any further, I say longtime bestie, but these two are more like on again, off again. These two are so messy. Right, so Paul Simon is trying to figure out what he wants to do with his life next, and here's what he arrived at. He didn't want to go on tour. I quote, "Where can you go as a group when you actually think about it? You can keep putting out an album every once in a while. You can go on tour." That was over. He wanted to sing as a soloist as opposed to writing these duets. "I always felt restricted as a singer, partly because there always had to be harmony, and it had to be sung in the same phrasing, and then you had to double it. You couldn't get free and loose with your singing." He wanted to explore different songwriting approaches. "I wouldn't say that my ideas were bigger than Simon and Garfunkel, but I would say that my ideas were different than Simon and Garfunkel, and I didn't want to go in that direction of a duo." In short, he wanted to be his own man, free from the confines of a two-person setup and a record label that expected him to continue in the vein of Simon and Garfunkel. I'm delighted that I didn't have to write a Simon and Garfunkel follow-up to Bridge Over Troubled Water, which I think would have been an inevitable letdown for people. It would have been hard on me, hard on both of us, but more hard on the writer because he takes the responsibility, so for me it was a chance to back out and gamble a little bit. It's been so long since it was a gamble. He goes on, "I didn't want to sing Scarborough Fair again. When you've developed, it's harder. Two people can go so far and then they're locked to each other. So that was over, as it should have been." Yikes. The end product of all this percolation is his 1972 eponymous album. It's technically not his debut because he did record a quasi-solo album in 1965 in the UK. Actually, it was a solo album, it's just that it wasn't really a big release. It was released in the UK, but it was not released in the States. So this album is both a texturally diverse piece, and it's also, paradoxically, remarkably cohesive. Here are some of the characteristics. It borrows from many genres. We've got on this album jazz and blues and Andean folk and African descendant Latin American music and reggae. It also features these extremely unadorned arrangements with lead vocals and lead guitar front and center. It gives the album an incredible intimacy. He sang personal songs with Simon and Garfunkel, but I think the impact is somewhat diminished by the presence of a second person. This one feels like, I was going to say you're sitting together in his living room, but actually it feels more like you're in a therapy session with him. It's neurotic and it's rueful without becoming bleak or glum. It sounds like this. No, I would not give you false hope on this.
Everything put together. Peg, you better look around. Me and Julio down by the schoolyard. I see peace like a river ran through the city. Oh, Papa Hobo, you can see that I got the paranoia blues from knocking around in New York City. Congratulations.
We've got some real heavy hitters on this album. We've got Cissy Houston, Whitney's mum. We've got Ron Carter, the jazz bassist. Who else do we have? Stefan Grappelli, the jazz violinist. Some real talent on this album. I find this album immensely comforting. I like to listen to this when I go to sleep. And particularly if I'm having a bit of a rough time. This is my go-to album when I'm trying to go to sleep. It's one of very few albums that I seem to be able to listen to over and over and over again and not get sick of it. I think maybe it's because it's kind of innocuous. It's really solid songwriting, but there's nothing about it that can become grating over time. It is a man and his guitar, first and foremost. And it's, to me, a tremendous start to his solo career. 1965 album notwithstanding. I'd recommend giving the album a listen in its entirety because while the individual songs are great, I think that it's most impactful when it's listened to as a whole. With that said, I would like to direct today's deep dive towards one of the album's hit singles, Me and Julio Down by the Schoolyard. This is one of my favorite of Paul Simon's more popular tunes. Let's find out why. We'll start with the music and then we'll move on to the lyrics. This is a very percussive track, especially when you consider that it doesn't have any drums, and I think it achieves this in a number of ways. First, the guitar part is played quite high up the neck. We'll get the guitar correspondent to demonstrate that for you. Right, this is a guitar. This is how we play E with open strings. And this is how we play E higher up the neck. Now, notice when I play higher up the neck, as opposed to lower down the neck with open strings, there's a slight difference in the timbre of the pick noise. When the E string is played totally unfretted, it has this length with which to make its little wibbly wobbly waves. If I play it up here, or here, it has this much space. So it's much tighter. Because of this, I think, the pick noise becomes a lot more pronounced, and you end up with these higher frequency percussive sounds that you don't necessarily, well, you might have down here, but they're not quite as pronounced as they are here. There's so much more than if you played it here. Second, the guitars are layered. There are at least 2 guitars. They're possibly double-tracked. The strumming already served a fairly percussive role. When you add more guitars to that, suddenly you've got a wall of high-frequency percussion coming from the guitars. Now remember, I mentioned that you end up with different string tensions if you're playing here as opposed to here. Paul Simon uses that to great effect on this track because when the rest of the guitars come in, they're playing it here. So you end up with a combination of different string tensions and the percussive elements that they contribute therein. When he's playing the song live, he always seems to have at least 3 guitars strumming at the same time. There's also usually an electric strumming along with the 2 acoustics. Third, we have, I don't know how to pronounce this man's name, Airto Moreira. He's a famed Brazilian percussionist. He is on this track. He played with Miles Davis. He played with Chick Corea. He played with Weather Report. On this track, he's playing an instrument called a cuica. It's a Brazilian friction drum, and it's played with a rosined stick, which allows it to create a range of pitched sounds. It's the hoo-hoo-hoo-hoo-hoo sort of a sound that you hear on it. I really love this part at the end of the song where the backing, I don't want to say rhythm guitarists because they're all rhythm guitarists, but the additional guitars drop out and the lead rhythm guitar and the cuica have this moment together before, bam, they bring them all back together again. It's a really lovely moment that creates interest at a particularly repetitive part of the song. The bass line on this track is fairly spacious.
The mama pajama rolled out of bed and she ran to the police station.
We'll get the bass correspondent in this time to demonstrate that. Okay, so this bass line is sparse in a number of ways. The first is that there are not very many notes. The second is that the notes are not sustained. So when they're played and then stopped. Like, instead of this, we have I'll play along with the recording so you can see what I mean.
Mama pajama rolled out of bed and she ran to the police station. When the papa found out, he began to shout and started the investigation.
I think the gappiness of this bass part really highlights the rhythmic qualities in the guitar parts while contributing its own rhythmic element to work in tandem with those guitars. This song features some very simple chord changes, but the sparseness of the arrangement means that it doesn't feel out of place on an album that has some far jazzier changes on other tunes. The first version of this song that I heard was actually the concert in Central Park. So I was completely shocked by the lack of instrumentation on the original version when I heard it like 10 years later.
One of these trumpet players is really getting his hips into the whole performance.
But despite having a surprisingly stripped back arrangement and rhythm section in particular, the power of this song to move the listener, I think, is evident in the performance that Paul Simon gave for a bunch of kids on Sesame Street. We'll have to forgive the adorable little girl for clapping on the 1 and 3 because she more than makes up for it in enthusiasm.
You can dance, dance. You can dance, dance. All right.
It's not the most virtuosic whistling solo, but it is up there. It's pretty solid. What are some other songs that have great whistling solos? Let me know in the comments if you can think of any songs that have good whistling solos. I can't bring a single one to mind right now. Musically, on Me and Julio Down by the Schoolyard, the simple production choices leave space for the song's story, which is really its centerpiece. Let's talk about the lyrics. This song plays out like an opera, perhaps of the soap variety. In essence, we have two characters who are caught in the act of doing something scandalous.
It's against the law. It was against the law.
They're subsequently shunned by their families and by society at large.
Mama looked down and spit on the ground every time my name gets mentioned.
The track is framed in an interesting way. The song takes place after the scandal has occurred. This introduces a giant question mark that hangs over the entirety of the song. Actually, it introduces several question marks. Who is Rosie? Who is Julio? And what were he and the narrator doing? Paul Simon never specified what the something scandalous was. From a contemporary Rolling Stone interview, I think this was 1974, the interviewer asks, "What is it that the mama saw? The whole world wants to know." And Paul Simon very coyly replies, "I have no idea what it is." "Of course you do, sir. You wrote the song." The interviewer retorts, "4 people said that was the first thing I would ask you." Paul Simon comes back. "Something sexual is what I imagine, but when I say something, I never bothered to figure out what it was. Didn't make any difference to me." I think it's pretty obvious that this song is about gay stuff. This album is curiously progressive. The family doctor in Run That Body Down is a woman.
Went to my doctor yesterday. She said I seem to be okay.
Armistice Day refers to a congresswoman.
Oh, Congresswoman.
In 1972, I don't think that these were insignificant details. In the same 1972 interview, Paul Simon was asked what he thought about women's liberation, and he replied like this: "I'm for the feminist movement. I support it. I believe that women are a group that is discriminated against." He goes on, I do what I want to do, and I earn a living at it. It's not as if to say I could earn the same living by doing household work. So now I think it's a really restrictive thing for a woman if one assumes that that will be her place, that she'll be in the home. This song is specifically sung from the perspective of a boy.
Papa said, oh, if I get that boy, I'm gonna stick him in the house of detention.
Papa said, oi, if I get that boy. About another boy.
See me and Julio down by the schoolyard.
Seeing me and Julio down by the schoolyard. To quote the critic Rob Sheffield, also from Rolling Stone, but more recently, whatever, Pablo. Even an ignorant kid hearing me and Julio on 70s AM Top 40 radio could hear what this song was about. A gay kid getting kicked out of the house. I appreciate that this is a happy, goofy song because with different music, this could have been a very different song. This would have been dark, you know? Because it's sort of played for a laugh, and the kid who is narrating the song seems kind of easygoing. It seems like he had one foot out the door anyway. But accompanied by different music, you've got a kid who's just been kicked out by his parents and is now a runaway and is being shunned by all of his community. I'm glad that the song is the way that it is. It's a great little piece of music. One thing that I find fascinating about the song is that the people surrounding the title characters are outraged and disgusted, but there's no sense of internal condemnation from the songwriter or his titular subjects. Given this, and his early 70s take on gender, I think it's only fair to conclude that Paul Simon was infected by the woke mind virus. Gay capers aside, Paul Simon is a masterful lyricist. He is the king of show, don't tell. We know about the character's location,
The queen of Corona.
race. Julio is presumably Puerto Rican, given the location and the name. Religion.
Papa said, oh, if I get that boy. Now when the radical priests come to get me released.
Class, sexuality, yet they never actually interact during the song itself. It's brilliant lyrical work set to earwormy hooks on an instrumentally unusual and quite short pop song. Well done, Paul Simon. A+. So, in his desire to separate himself from Simon and Garfunkel, Paul Simon announced his mission statement for the remainder of his career. He would continue to produce albums that included a fluorescent cast of characters interspersed with these intensely personal studies, meditations. He would also continue to borrow heavily from multiple genres, but across entire albums. So for example, you hear the blues on this album on tracks like Run That Body Down and Paranoia Blues.
Any way you choose, you're bound to lose in New York City.
And these concepts are expanded upon on Ryman Simon. Or you've got jazz on tracks like Everything Put Together Falls Apart. Ooh, I ain't blind. That presage Still Crazy After All These Years.
I've just learned that this is one of those words that I've only ever read and not heard, and I've discovered that I've been pronouncing it wrong for years. It's pronounced like this.
Presage.
Who knew? Evidently not the anchor.
And you've got non-Western instrumentalists on tracks like Duncan, Me and Julio Down by the Schoolyard, Mother and Child Reunion, which point steadfastly in the direction of Graceland. This album is a tour guide for the rest of Paul Simon's career. And that's it from me. If you enjoyed this episode or you would like to support any of the weird things I do, I'll leave a link in the description to my Buy Me a Coffee page where you are most welcome to make a donation if you wish, but no pressure, my friends. Huge thank you to everybody who has made a donation or signed up as a member. I really appreciate you. As I mentioned last week, I don't always have time to reply to your messages, but I do read them and I do appreciate them. So thank you. If you're curious about what any of my original music sounds like, I'll leave a link in the description to that as well. My band is in the process of releasing our third album. We've got 2 singles out. And we've got a 3rd coming out in a few weeks. Otherwise, thanks for hanging out with me. I'll see you here next week. Have a great weekend. Hi, are you trying to get in my jacket?